You're listening to Kicking It with the Koves. Do you have a problem with it?
No, Sensei.
I mean, no, Dad.
No, Dad.
Hey everybody, Jesse Cove here again. I'm sitting across from my twin sister Rachel Cove, and I'm sitting next to my dad Martin Cove, aka John Kreese, aka any other characters you guys have seen. We are here with Kicking In with the Koves. We have an incredible episode today. We've got Dr. Mark Goulston on with us. He's a transformational executive coach, funding member of the Newsweek Expert Forum, author and co-author to 11 books, with including his book, Just Listen, UCLA professor of psychiatry, world-renowned expert in suicide prevention, and there is so much more. Your bio was so incredible, Dr. Mark Goulston. I mean, it was really fascinating to see all the different things that you do, you know, and the work that you do. I mean, there's a never-ending amount of questions that we have for you today.
Yeah, I don't even know, like, where should we start? I mean, I'm always curious as to understand how people started out their journey in their profession. Did you always know that you wanted to get into this work of initially with psychiatry, correct?
Right. Yeah. Well, as I mentioned before, I didn't have the happiest of households. Kind of a critical parent, but hardworking. You know, I think he was critical because he wanted to support us, and was always worried about that. And I was the youngest of three, and so yes, I did go into psychiatry, but I think one of my greatest accomplishments, even though I've accomplished a few things, is I dropped out of medical school twice and finished.
Wow. Oh, can you go into that story? Because
Dropped out twice.
It's such a beautiful story.
Well, what happened is I think I had untreated depression. And so I was highlighting all the books and I couldn't hold on to the information. So I took a leave of absence, which they allow you to do, because everybody's allowed a single leave of absence. I went and worked in blue collar jobs, which I still think were the best jobs of my life. I used to put up the Heineken windmills and all the displays in bars in South Boston, and I'd make friends with the bartenders, and I'd climb up on ladders and see rat skeletons. I loved it, and I'd negotiate with them. I'd say, "Here, you can have this freaking neon light for your basement if you'll put it up in your bar for a month." I loved it, and my mind worked at that level. Then I came back to med school, and within a few months, the depression hit again, because functioning at that level, which was easy and wonderful, was not the same thing as being in med school. So I asked for another leave of absence, and I didn't realize that the school loses matching funds when someone takes a leave of absence. So they didn't mind taking a hit on me the first time around, but here I am asking again. And I met with the head of the school, who cares about money. He has to keep the place afloat. And I don't even remember the meeting. And he sends a letter to the dean of students, who cares about students. And I get a call. And I think what it was is the dean of the head of the school was worried that once I found out that I was getting kicked out, that I might not take it too well. And I was never someone who would act out hurting others, but I could go the other direction. I think he was worried. So the dean of students calls me, and this was in Boston, and he had a thick Irish Catholic accent. His name was William McNary, and we called him Mac. And he calls me, he says, "Mac, this is Mac, you better get in here, Mac." I said, "Why?" He said, "Mac, I got a letter here from the dean, better get in here." So I go in there, and he says, "Here, Mac, read the letter." And the letter says, "I've met with Mr. Goulston. We talked about alternate careers, and I'm advising the promotions committee that he be asked to withdraw." And I said, "What does that mean?" And he says, "Mark, you've been kicked out." And I'll tell you, something happened, because I'm not religious or spiritual, but this is almost religious. When he said that, it's like I was shot in the stomach. And I know what that feels like, because I had life-saving perforated colon surgery about 10 years ago. So I kind of double over and I start touching my cheekbones, because I thought I was bleeding. And I just kept touching my eyes and looking at my hands, and I wasn't bleeding. I was crying. And I would, and here's the miracle. I was so raw and vulnerable I didn't cover it up with, they can't do that. I'm passing everything. How dare they do that? And I didn't cover it up with whining. It was just raw. Like he just looked at me and there I was doubled over. And so I came from a background that was critical that said, you're only worth something if you do something. So I probably wasn't worth much in the world's eyes. So imagine hearing this, if that's where you come from inside. So the dean of students says to me, Mark, you didn't mess up because you're passing miraculously, but you are messed up. But if you got unmessed up, I think this school would be glad they gave you a second chance. And I didn't know what he was saying. It didn't make any sense. Well, why would you want to give me a second chance? I can't do anything. And he said, and even if you don't get unmessed up, even if you don't become a doctor, even if you don't do anything the rest of your life, I'd be proud to know you. And then I just started sobbing, like, what? I'm pretty close to it now. He said, I'd be proud to know you because you got a streak of goodness in you that we don't grade in medical school. And you don't know how much the world needs that goodness, and you're not going to know it till you're 35, but you got to make it till you're 35. And then he pointed at me because I wouldn't look at him. He said, look at me. And he's pointing at me. He said, and you got to make it till you're 35, and you deserve to be on this planet, and you're going to let me help you. And so he stood up to the whole promotions committee saying, we're giving this one a second chance. And the combination of breaking open, in fact, I can do a form of therapy, which is the same as what ayahuasca does for people without ayahuasca. Oh. Because what happens is with ayahuasca, it rips you open. So you're out of control. You're like a Rubik's Cube that keeps solving in the wrong, solution because your life is so messed up. And ayahuasca just rips it up, and you have a therapist that guides you back to a different solution. So when he said to me, you're going to let me help you, I remember I was just crying and I reached out to him and I said, I think I'd like that. Whereas if he said, call me if I can help you, I wouldn't have called him. I probably wouldn't be here. But the combination of being broken open, and I had all these defense mechanisms. I was sarcastic, I was cynical, I was witty, but it was all a cover-up. It was all bullshit. But the fact that I was ripped open and he saw value in me that I didn't, and he went to bat for me at his own risk. He was a PhD standing up to, all these MDs in Boston. And then I had to meet with the promotions committee, and it's like a tribunal, you're surrounded by all these big doctors and whatever. And he's a PhD, And the guy, I won't mention the guy's name, but the head of the committee was the head of surgery at Boston Medical Center, now Boston Medical Center. It was Boston City Hospital. And this guy was universally disliked because he was heavy, he put you down, he smoked a cigar. And so I'm in there surrounded by these doctors. And then at first they're nice. So what happened, Mark? And I'm just sort of talking. And then I didn't know from agendas and business meeting, but the head of it says, okay, we got to move on already. And so he takes over. And this guy was universally disliked because he would just talk down to people. This would be a good episode for bullying, how to stand up for bullies.
Oh, yes.
He says,
talk about it a lot.
He says, why should we give you a second chance? Doesn't sound like you're going to be a doctor. Why don't we just cut our losses? You go your way, we'll go our way. And I don't know what happened to me. So I'm a little bit like David. I'm smaller than him with Goliath. And I won't tell you his last name. And I said, Dr. So-and-so, it hasn't been a good year. He said, what? I said, yeah, my dad had colon cancer. I think he's going to be okay. I had a wife and she wanted to cut her losses just like all you want to do. I got thyroid disease and they gave me pills and it affected my liver. And he's going, and I said, and I'm confused and I'm not sure if I want to be a doctor, don't want to be a doctor. And he's looking at me like he's irritated. So, and this is when I should have dropped out and gone into TV. So there I am, and he's looking at me, and he's puffing his cigar. And then, as God is my witness, I look into his eyes, like I'm looking into your eyes, and I said, so I'd like to plead insanity and throw myself on the mercy of a room full of doctors. And I looked at him and I just stared at him. And I've learned to look in people's eyes. I can look into people's eyes. This is how I grab people out of suicide. And I grab them by the eyes and I say, you're not going anywhere. I'm going to find you and you're going to walk out. So that's where I learned to just stare into anyone's eyes. And I grabbed onto his eyes, and then the tears came, and I was just staring at him. He takes the cigar, he pushes it out, he twists his chair around, and he won't look at me, and he doesn't say anything. So the room is quiet, and the dean of students is looking around and says, okay, Mark, you can leave, and they lose funding every time someone takes a leave of absence. The tuition doesn't pay for it all. And so I go out, I'm in a stairwell, I'm kind of holding the stairwell like this, and the dean of students comes out, puts his arm around me. He says, take a year, take 5 years. You will always be welcome back at Boston University Medical School. So I went from there, and I took a year off, and I worked at the place called the Menninger Foundation, a psychiatric foundation. It's now in Houston. It used to be in Topeka, Kansas. And I'm from the suburbs of Boston. And I was able to reach schizophrenic farm boys. I just hang out with them. I don't know what I did, but I could reach them. And I'd never had a knack for anything like that. So I finish med school, and then I go to UCLA to do training in psychiatry. But about 5 years later, I meet with Dean McNary to thank him. I said, why'd you do that for me? He said, because someone did it for me 30 years ago.
Wow.
I said, why did they give me unlimited leave of absence? It could have cost them a lot of money. And he looked at me and he said, no one before or since ever put that guy in his place the way you did.
Mm.
It was the eyes.
It was the eyes. It was the Daniel LaRussa kick from Karate Kid.
That's right. You kicked him in his soul.
So you,
I said, what happened to him? Oh, he got caught in a scandal. He's in some community hospital somewhere. But something what I'd love to segue into is one of the things that teenagers have trouble sharing with their parents is they have trouble sharing and just raw how hurt and afraid they are because they don't trust their parents emotionally. They think their parents are going to say, get over it. Oh, you're just a teenager. Or they think their parents are going to be kind of clueless. And the fear in a lot of, because I was a suicide specialist for 25 years, none of my patients died by suicide. But underneath, you got to drill in underneath all the anger. In Johnny Lawrence, you got to drill down, something that I learned from a guy who, a good friend of mine, ran the Marines in the 90s. He was the first CEO of the U.S. Intrepid aircraft carrier. And we did a transition program. And he taught me something called the 5 realies. And this thing I called surgical empathy. One of the techniques is someone says something to you and you say, yeah, I understand it, but what's really going on? Oh, I understand that. And when he did it with returning Marines, because we worked on a transition program between 2006 and 2008, he said, returning Marines would say, well, sir, it's a big transition from the war front to civilian. He said, I understand that. What's really going on? Well, I'm getting into arguments at home. I understand arguments are tough. What's really going on? And he said, when I got to the 5th really, he said they would look at me like deers in a headlight and they'd say, I saw and did horrible things, sir. And when I close my eyes, I see them more vividly. So I don't close my eyes much, sir.
Mm.
And he gave them a direct order. If you've been a Marine in combat, we've all done and seen awful things. I'm giving you a direct order to put it aside because you've earned the right to a life. And he got letters, thanking him for saving lives. But when you get into the 5 realies, you got to be really patient, because if you can break into your angry teenager who's acting out, what's really going on? What's going on underneath it all is, I'm scared. I don't even know if I have the right to be scared. Now, of course, it's a problem if what they're scared of is you. So my dad was critical, but he really wasn't physically abusive. But do you follow what I'm saying? Is underneath your character, Johnny Lawrence, underneath everything, he's afraid. What's he afraid of? He's afraid of what a lot of extremists, I don't want to get into politics, are afraid of. I don't think I can learn new things. I think I'm basically stupid. I think, I'm unskilled, but your show has demonstrated that he could learn things, and that's kind of his character arc. But a lot of people down deep are afraid they can't learn new things. And they're going to be out of work. So anyway, you gave me a long leash and I took it, and sorry for that.
It was incredible. I'm just fascinated by everything you said. And there's so much to talk about within that. One, like how important just simple communication is, like you said, like surgery, being able to communicate like that, very precisely. Just like you said, you gave him an order to his right to life. Even that concept alone is, one, it's beautiful, and two, it's just like this person deserves a right to a life, and someone's probably never said it to him like that, or that kind of concept. I mean, it's so simple, like we all deserve a right to life, and if you say it to someone like that, I mean, it really opened them up. And then you were talking about, Karate Kid, Cobra Kai, like my dad's character John Kreese, like, he's someone who that character was in war, and we talk about his character all the time, the ins and outs, and other characters that I've played in movies. Part of being an actor is diving into psychology, right? And I think that we're still figuring out, even today, some of the things you talked about. Dad, we talk about what is the motivation behind John Kreese? What is some of these things that motivate him? Why does he act the way he does? Outside the writing, that's needed for the show. And I think it's really amazing.
Here's the motivation behind John Kreese. You ready?
Here it is, guys. You're hearing it right now on Kicking It with the Koves. Here it is.
So if we did the 5 realies with John Kreese, what is it? What's way down deep is, can we swear on the show?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
You want to know what's wrong with me? I'm fucking broken inside and I can't be fixed, okay? And I guard it. I guard it with my life. And I show the world with my big shit-eating grin, this piece of porcelain that's all smashed up behind me. It's all fucked up. And that's how I go through life. And I don't show it to anyone because I don't trust anyone. You get it yet? And I have reason to not trust anyone. You live my life, you'll see why you can't trust anyone. But I'm walking around, looking like I'm okay, but inside I'm all ready to shatter. And if I shatter, I'm going Looney Tunes and I'm not coming back. So I just keep it together every day, make it through the day. That was a pretty good day. Welcome to my world.
It's unbelievable what you just said. It makes me emotional because I feel like it's not just a character like John Kreese that feels that way. I feel like most men feel that way. I feel that in our society, men have developed this idea that they are not allowed to be vulnerable. They are not allowed to expose their hurt, because if they expose their hurt, they're going to be targets. They're going to be targets for other people to hurt them. And it's weak. And again, we've talked about this on another show. It's like, where's the fine line? But also, if you have a right to life, when does a man have a right to just let their guard down and cry? You were talking about what it was like for you when you just let those tears out. And I'm curious because at that time, when were men ever crying? I mean, did your dad ever show you his tears? Did your dad ever show you that was okay?
Well,
I mean, that must have felt like such a huge relief.
Well, I'll share something because it's, there's always backstories, and thank you for allowing me to go on like this.
Oh, are you kidding me? This is so great. People, people need to hear stuff like this. I mean, we live in, I mean, this is my interpretation sometimes, but sometimes I feel like, people are kind of shy away from the reality and the truth of these kind of concepts and these kind of realities of life. People are in pain. People are in pain and people are not happy. And I'm someone who used to people please like crazy. I used to tell people all the time, like, oh, I'll do this. And I'm going to be there and I'm going to get this. I'll be there at this time. And, and then at a certain point, I was like, you know what? I don't really want to do that. I'm not going to be there on time. I don't feel like doing this, or it's not comfortable for me, or I just don't like it, or I don't like you, or whatever, And once I started doing things like that, the reality and the truth of like what you're talking about, just getting to the truth of these things, it gave me so much confidence in who I am and what I say. It's amazing. And I'm still working on it today. It's like, I'm still being broken open. Every year I'm breaking open a little bit more and more.
Okay, so can I shrink you for a few minutes?
Yes, make me very small.
So I won't say it was the same vehemence of John Kreese, but I will say, but this is what I hear you saying. And if you're listening in or watching this, you might relate to this. And there's a little Joe Rogan in you. And again, I'm not saying that as a criticism, because I think I figured out Joe Rogan. Because I had the same thing, except I didn't go to anger and extreme fighting. I went to depression. I didn't act in the anger. I pushed it in. So what a lot of people like him and you feel is you can't stand arbitrary authority, meaning whimsical authority by people who say, we know what's best for you. And they haven't earned the right to say, we know what's best for you, because they haven't listened to you. They don't know who you are. Now, then again, if they're seeing an attitude in you, they haven't been interested enough and they didn't have the knowledge that underneath the attitude might be fear, might be hurt, might be feeling lost, might be feeling like, I don't know if I'm glued together inside. Sometimes I just think I'm just making it through the day. But the point is, if your experience of the world is it's unsafe, you're never going to see it. And if your attitude is sort of, it's interesting, Rachel knows about this friend of mine, Jason Reed. His 14-year-old son died by suicide. And he gave me this wonderful insight, and I'm glad your listeners and viewers are listening to this. He said, when you ask your teenager, how you doing? Your teenager, when they say I'm great, they're good. But when they say I'm fine, they're not. When they say I'm fine, what they're really saying is leave me alone. And what they're really saying is leave me alone because you wouldn't have a clue about how to make me feel better anyway. That's why I don't open up to you. Because if I open up to you, because you've never opened up to anyone, it's going to be a shitstorm and you won't know how to handle it. I'll say to myself, why did I even bother opening up to you? And you'll try to fix it with a solution because I'm making you too nervous because I'm triggering your trauma that you never dealt with. And that's why I say I'm fine, because I have little to no confidence that a conversation will make me feel better. At best, it'll make me feel worse. It'll be a waste of time. But do you get what I'm saying? It's that, see, I had the same problem about arbitrary authority is whimsical authority. And I went to Newton South High School, very high pressure, even way back when I went to, oh, you got to go to a college, you got to go fit a mold. And I'm sure it was even worse with Joe Rogan. And if you look up some of his background, he went to University of Massachusetts, he dropped out. And I just waited a little bit longer to drop out. But I think what it was is when he went out in the world and the world was telling him, we know what's best for you. We know what you should do. And the thing is, I sent out a tweet the other day, and the tweet was, don't confuse why do I have to be different with I don't know how to be the same. I don't know how to be the same. I don't know how to fit into your box. And every time I try to fit into your box, I don't do that well. And that's what, that's what happened to me when I dropped out.
The societal box, you mean?
The societal box.
Right. Okay.
And by arbitrary authority, the societal box is, if you drill down, well, why should I do it that way? Well, because that's the way you're supposed to do it. Because see, underneath feeling wounded and feeling hurt and afraid is the thing that covers it is rage. But we're often afraid to show the rage, because if we show the rage to someone who's hurt us or that we're afraid of, we think they'll kill us.
Dad, I'm curious, do you feel like that John Kreese fits this mold? Do you feel that he is guarded, but underneath is just in immense amount of pain and fear?
Well, I think he has a great deal of fear, but I think that the difference between what we were talking about just now is that he is closer to being able to release that fear, that vulnerability, as the episodes go on, and the situations go on in his life that we see, because it's not Johnny Lawrence's life, it's not as predominant each episode. But I believe, as you said, that, he could have cracked at any given moment. And what brought him back and restructured his biology, his emotional state, is Cobra Kai. In other words, it's motivation. It's as if it's a woman, it's a woman that you love and you put her on a pedestal. So he put Cobra Kai on a pedestal, and that's why he takes over the dojo, because Johnny Lawrence makes Cobra Kai second. And John Kreese always had Cobra Kai as primary in his life. Secondary was his love for Johnny Lawrence. And that had to change. That had to change. That Cobra Kai was the most important thing always and will forever be. So I think he has something that maybe others don't have. If they're at a loss for what to do with their lives, they're about to crack, they're so frightened, they can't maintain a reality or a vulnerability. I believe that he substitutes very well this concept called Cobra Kai and the purity of it, the morality of it, the morality of himself administering Cobra Kai to students. And that, he finds, builds character and builds discipline.
Structure.
Yeah, an improved structure of all his students to make them better in life. And that's the difference between someone who doesn't have that motivation, who doesn't have that, I would say that possibility. It's not a vulnerability, because his vulnerability is only shown when he lets go of his fear. And at the same time, the fear is so strong that the motivation is so strong.
You said something earlier, Dr. Goulston, that I thought was really profound when you shared about how parents communicate with their children. And I was actually talking about this yesterday. People have stopped listening to each other, and they're not even asking their children, how is your soul doing? How is your heart doing? How are you when you're at school? What do you do during lunch? Who are you communicating with? I ask my son's 4, and if I say to him, Jackson, how was your day? He goes, I don't know. He's 4.
So here's Rachel, here's a tip for you that I got from the headmaster of our elementary school. One of the smartest thing he ever said. And I think if I know Rachel, I'm getting to know you, you're going to smile at this one.
All right, smiling.
He meets with the parents and he says, what do you say when your kids come home from school? And they say, how was your day? He says, how do they respond? Do they love it? And they all laugh. They say, no, they hate it. He said, don't you realize that they're being asked questions all day long? 100 questions. And when they get home, why do you ask them the question? Well, I want to connect with them. Yeah. And then he said, why don't you just say, boy, am I glad to see you? Because they don't want to be evaluated. They're sick and tired of the questioning. And, but while we're on the topic of parents talking to their teens, so something that I think you may have seen in the presentation that Jason and I did, I want to give it to your viewers and listeners. It's what we call the 4 prompts. And it's probably worth writing down, but people can review the session. And this is what you do with your teen that you're worried about. And by the way, do it when you're doing an activity, because teens hate heart-to-heart conversations, eye to eye. It's like nails on a chalkboard.
Also, when you're driving, right? I heard when you're driving.
When you're driving or doing an activity. Yeah. And here's how you tee it up. You could say, well, all of us parents are nervous with this pandemic thing. We're all worried about our kids. You're locked down, you're locked up, you go in, you whatever. Can I run some things by you? Because you want to prepare them that you're going to actually be sincere about something. And so the first prompt is, at its absolute worst, how awful are you capable of feeling about your life or yourself? They're going to go, what? Yeah, at its absolute worst, how awful are you capable of feeling about your life or yourself? And if you're lucky, they'll say, well, pretty awful. Here's surgical empathy. Pretty awful or very awful? Okay, very awful, okay? And when you're feeling it, here's the second prompt. How alone do you feel when you're feeling it? Pretty alone or all alone? Okay, already, all alone. Third prompt, take me to the last time you felt it. What? Or WTF? Yeah, take me to the last time you felt it. Was it 2:30 in the morning when we heard you walking around, upstairs, you weren't sleeping? And something magical happens is when they can tell you, when they can describe something so clearly that you see it, they re-feel it. If they're generic, yeah, I was having trouble falling asleep. Well, what happened? Well, I was walking around at 2:30. Yeah, what happened next? I couldn't fall asleep. No, I know it's frustrating. What happened next? I didn't know whether to kick the wall, hit the wall, or put my head through the wall. What happened next? Well, I started looking for some of your sleeping pills. Looks like you hid them pretty well. Couldn't find them. What happened next? The sun rose. And I was a little better. And then the fourth prompt is, and if you do it, and again, it's not going to work magically like on television or even on a podcast, but I'm just giving you some ideas. And the fourth prompt is you say, look at me. And hopefully you've earned the right for them to look at you. And you say, look at me. When you feel that way next, or you're even heading in that direction, I have a request. I have a favor. I want you to do whatever it takes to get your mom or your dad or my undivided attention. I mean, you don't have to break something, but do whatever it takes to get our undivided attention, because we're just off doing a million things. And there's nothing more important to me or your mom or your dad than you not being alone there when you feel that awful.
Wow, just saying those words is like so powerful.
So powerful. And it's truly being attuned to and connected with. That's what it's what we're all seeking, is true connection. And I think we've become so distracted with our phones, with work, with the pressures of society and our roles in our lives, that we forget that we just need to connect with one another. And that's why I love your book and I love everything you stand for around surgical empathy. Could you delve more into what surgical empathy is?
So here, I'll send you a video clip, which I did with a disabled vet. And he did something with it because I tried surgical empathy on him. And here's the difference between clinical empathy, which is fine, and surgical empathy. So imagine you're coming in to see me and you're depressed. So it's clear to both of us that you're not happy. Clinical empathy is, I'm there keeping a safe distance from raw emotion. And I'm saying, tell me what's going on. Have you been depressed or anxious? How long have you felt that way? When you felt really depressed, have you ever had thoughts of hurting yourself? So, that's kind and that's fine. Surgical empathy is you walk in, I look at you in the eye and I say, you've been depressed, haven't you?
Wow.
I mean, you've been really depressed. Like, you don't know how you're going to make it through the day depressed. Is that true?
Can I interrupt you for a second?
But can you feel the difference between
the
us?
difference
Yes.
in
Yeah.
the way you language those words is so different, because the first question, and I deal with this all the time with clients and with people I work with, they often feel like their therapists are not really caring about them, or they're just asking questions to just check the boxes, right? The second set of questions made me feel like you were joining me in the discussion. It made me feel like you were with me and you really cared about what you were asking me. And those questions can truly change someone's life if people give themselves permission to join people in their experience. And I think that's what surgical empathy is, right? Like, it's really joining people and holding them in their experience, correct?
Yeah. I got to share one of the worst days in my career, because that's when I learned to listen into people's eyes. Can I share that with you?
Please.
Yeah.
I was paged by these oncologists up in one of the inpatient wards at UCLA. And this is way back when this fellow had AIDS, and AIDS hadn't been diagnosed yet. He just had this weird disorder that nobody understood. And they said, you got to go up and do a consult on Mr. Jones and okay the restraints. We have his arms and legs in, because he's pulling at his IVs. He's on a respirator, he's pulling at the respirator. He's moving all around the bed, and he's psychotic. So you got to go up there and okay the restraints and okay the medicine to calm him down. This is where I learned to listen into people's eyes. So I go into the room, and his eyes are like saucer, like I'm looking in your eyes. And he can't talk because he's got the respirator on. He goes, ah. And I said, what is it? He goes, ah. I said, what's going on? And he couldn't talk. And so I put a pencil in his hand because his wrists were tied down, and he just scribbled. And they said, he's just psychotic. And he just was screaming at me with those eyes. And I said, you've been pulling at your IV. You've been kicking to get off the bed. You've been pulling at the respirator. You're all agitated. We had to put your arms and legs down. And I'm giving you a medicine to calm you down. And when you calm down, we'll take everything off. And he's just looking at me. And I'm just thinking, well, maybe they're right. The arbitrary authority of the oncologist saying, we declare him to be psychotic, tie him down. A day later, I get a page. Mr. Jones is up. He's sitting in bed. He's out of the restraints. He's off the respirator. He told us to page you. So I go into the room, and he's there in his bed. And then he looks over at me as I walk in the room. And I swear he grabs onto my eyes with his eyes, and he says, pull up a chair. And he seats me in a chair. And he's holding onto my eyes. And he said, what I was trying to tell you is that a piece of the respirator had broken off and was stuck in my throat.
Ugh.
And you do understand that I will kill myself before I go through that again. Do you effing understand? and he wouldn't let go of my eyes. And they got a little emotional, and I said, I'm sorry. I understand. But that was sort of a turning point. And what I realize is when you're with people, underneath their acting out is just their way of trying to cope with the pain. But underneath, there's a pain that emotionally they feel that the next step is, they're going to go crazy and never come back. So I just know it's in there.
And I think what parents want to do is fix the pain. And there's nothing wrong with that. We never want our children to be in pain. We never want our loved ones to be in pain. And I think there needs to be a different way of looking at it and approaching it. Instead of trying to fix it, sit down and do what you're saying. Listen. And if there is a sense of discomfort, anxiety that's being triggered within you, sit with that, observe that. Where is that coming from? Why do you need to fix this person in front of you to make you feel better? And it's learning to trust the process, right? To trust the emotions. And just listen. That's why, I mean, your book it sounds so simple, but why do you think it's so hard? Why do you think it's so hard for people to be surgically empathetic towards one another?
Because if we've never been listened to, if our hurt and fear was never listened to, and the way we acted out was reacted and punished, I'll share a little anecdote. This will be to all the young parents. So my children are all grown. My wife gets all the credit. They have each other's back. They've done well. They're 40, 37, 32. And my oldest child had trouble sharing her younger siblings when they were born. And I remember, so she had a rough time each time. And when our youngest child was born, my wife said to me, you got to go handle our oldest. Because she was saying, and she was 7, and my wife was feeding our youngest. And I saw her, and she was like primal deprivation. Whereas initially, when our middle child was born, what she would say to me is, I want mommy, I want mommy, I want mommy. By the time she was 7, it had escalated to, I hate my fucking life. I hate life. And all this kind of thing. And to understand what happened next, you need to know that I'm a third born and my wife is a second born. And this is my firstborn. And so she was acting up. She was swearing. I could have said, you better go to your room till you calm down. You need a timeout. But look, I'm a shrink. I know there's something else going on. I said, what is it? And she, and she would throw out some choice words, which she learned from her mom. And I kept saying, what is it? What is it? But I was determined that there's something in there that's bothering her. I'm a third born, my wife's a second born. And she looks at me. And when she realizes that I'm not going to punish her or send her away, she looked at me and she said, I was the first to be born. I'll be the first to die. You have dogs that are dying, grandparents that are dying. I don't know what a firstborn feels like. And she runs across the room, jumps up on the coffee table, throws her arms around me, puts her arms around my neck, and she says, Daddy, keep talking. And I looked up at the ceiling and I went, thank you, God, for letting me not punish her for being terrified.
Wow.
That's great stuff.
What do you think you gave to her in that moment? Was it a sense of security for her to just authentically be her in that moment?
Well, I think what I did is, we talk about, Erik Erikson talked about all the social levels of development. Mm-hmm. And at the bottom is basic trust or basic mistrust. And when you walk into the world, If you trust the world, it's a different life. If you mistrust the world, it's a different life. Albert Einstein said, the most important question you have to figure out in your life is whether the world is safe. And so I think what I did was, by knowing that there was something going on underneath her tantrum, she was able to actually know what it was. I didn't know what it was. And then she spontaneously ran to me, and it was like a full body connection. And she was able to sort of lean into that. I have a podcast called My Wake Up Call. I'd love to have each of you on. That'll be through. We'll have a trifecta.
I am there already. I would be honored to be on your podcast.
Can I share another anecdote? Are we okay? We have time here?
We might have to wrap it up shortly. Because I really wanted you to talk quickly about what your book was about. And
the FBI book and how that came about in some of how it's pertinent to what you're talking about now.
Okay. What happened is, when I was at UCLA, one of my mentors was this top suicide pioneer, one of the top 5 in the world. He sent me all these suicidal people. And I used to do a program. He had a course called On Death and Suicide, and I would do for upper division college students, and I would do a role play where I would come in and I would play a student, and I'd pull a gun out of a manila envelope, and I'd say, talk me out of it. And they could never talk me out of it. And I'd always pull the trigger, and then I'd say, this is what you could have said that would have made me give you the gun. We even have some video clips of it that are really old. And then what happened is, as my kids were going through school, I would often do programs for the parents. So when my kids were in middle school, like 9th grade, there was going to be 2 presentations between an FBI guy and me about keeping your child safe. And so I really liked what this FBI guy was about. And then I went on and I do this role play. And so the title of my talk was, It's My Party and I'll Die If I Want to. And what I do is I play their acne-ridden kid who's in the 10th grade. And I say, I'm going to the party this weekend. You're not calling the other parents. Yes, there's going to be drugs. There's probably going to be guns. You have fucked up my whole life. I have a 4.9 GPA and I'm a loser, and you're not going to ruin it. And then I challenge the parents to talk me out of it. And I play with them. And there's one point where the parents are, and I always do a gotcha. So there's one point where I let the parents think that they're making progress with me. And so I say, let me see if I get this right, because I'm really giving you a hard time, because you really love me, don't you? Oh, yeah. And you want what's best for me. Oh, yeah. And what you're telling me is that my reward for doing everything that you're telling me to do that's good for me, my reward for that is that I get to grow up and be as well-adjusted and happy as all of you. And half of them are divorced, so they all just start laughing. And then I say, this is what you could have said to me, that would have caused me to have a little more, go to the party and not get into trouble. And so what happened is he saw that, and I started doing that with the FBI, where I played, finally, what I would play with the FBI is I'd play a FBI officer, a police officer. I'd have my uniform on underneath my sport jacket. I pull the sport jacket off. I put on broken glasses, and I'd say, I'm the guy in your department who shot the kid with the plastic gun last year. And if you don't talk me out, and I've gone on leave for a year, and then I pull a gun out, and I said, if you don't talk me out of it, I'm going on permanent leave. And I put the gun to my neck, and I said, then you live with the ghost of someone you should have been able to prevent from killing themselves. And this time it's one of your own. And they could never talk me out of it. I pull the trigger, and then I say, this is what you should have said. And there's videos of that on up on the web too.
Oh, it's pure improvisation. I mean, it's pure theater,
and so I'd go on some drive-alongs and things like that, and I'd say, this is what you could do. And you know, and offline, I'll tell you a project I'm working on, which I can't tell you about.
I've I've ridden with detectives in New York and, ride-alongs, big time ride-alongs, and where I would go in low and they'd go in high, and, I was supposed to go on investigations, and this was an apprehension. And I said, I really want to go. It's an apprehension investigation, isn't it? And they said, yeah, throw a vest on and go. And it's really meaningful. I've always believed everybody should go, whether it's FBI or whether it's local police. Everyone should ride along one day to show how these people put themselves on the line. And even from an intellectual standpoint of what you're saying, when you're in a room doing an improv like this, it's probably so effective. What is the percentage of the officers, whether it's FBI or local police, that do say the right thing, that do disarm the situation? Is there a large percentage, or is it?
I'm not a researcher. That's always been my problem with my suicide stuff. Is you just put me in a situation, but I'm guessing it's much higher than the public would think. I think the public has a distorted view, and you're right. You don't know what these people are, what they deal with. I'm going to mention one plug, which the past sheriff, it was his pet project, but he didn't get reelected in LA. But I'm part of a program called popprotocol.org, POP protocol.org. And the two founders are two African Americans. And what we did is we went into the high schools, and what POP stands for is pull over protocol. And you train kids. This is what you do when you're pulled over, because they don't know. Like the first thing when you're pulled over is put your hands up on the steering wheel. If you're African American, palms out so they can see the whites of your hands. And then you ask permission when they come over. Might I be able to reach for my registration, which is such and such? And what we're hoping to do is create stickers. So when you pull over a car and it has a POP protocol sticker, you're a little less anxious as a law enforcement, because you say, oh, they've gone through the training, because a lot of times kids just don't know what to do. And the response was phenomenal. I mean, these inner city kids said, geez, it turned around my whole view of police officers, because it was jointly performed by the two Black founders and the LA Sheriff's Department. But what happened is the past LA sheriff didn't get reelected. So it's still there if you go to POP protocol. And we would love to, share it anywhere that we could.
Oh, it's fascinating. I mean, there's, I hate to even do this, because I feel like we've just barely cracked the surface of all these subjects and these incredible mental health tools and your story. I mean, I did not get enough questions in. I wanted to ask more because I'm so fascinated by everything you're saying, Doctor. And I definitely want us to come on your podcast if we can. Be amazing, and maybe even do another part to this. But I also wanted to plug your book before we wrap, which is Just Listen, correct? Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you just briefly want to tell people what it is really quickly, where they can get it, and how to find you and get in touch with you as well on social media.
Thank you. So Just Listen, I'm humbled by it. It's in 28 languages, became the top book on listening in the world, but it wasn't a bestseller out of the gate. So it just keeps selling. If you look up Just Listen, the Audible version of it is now free on YouTube. I just did a search for my name in the last week. And if you do my name and Just Listen, the 7.5-hour Audible is on YouTube. So if you want to listen to the book, you can do that for free. And I have a website, markgoulston.com, markgoulston.com. I hope they'll check out my Wake Up Call. I got to get you people on. I have 10 weeks of inventory, posting three a week.
Wow.
We'd love to. We would love to.
So we'll do that.
We'll do some improvising. Yeah.
That would be interesting. I'd love to do that.
And Martin, I want to thank you for allowing me to screw with your character and whatever, like I did earlier. I didn't ask your permission. I just leaped in there. But that's what John Kreese would have done, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
he's on the edge.
You just walked into the room and took over. So it's perfectly fine that you did that. You did it, John Kreese. But it's always interesting to hear the people's opinion. I mean, there's so many opinions of this character, and he's such a celebrated character. I never think of him as totally the villain, because the mind expansion is far more interesting for me as an actor. And I loved psychology back in the day when I was, early days of college, as much as I love theater. I always loved, what the characters were about, even before I got on stage, when I was doing theater. And to me, it's all part and parcel. It's all together.
Well, I noticed something in one of the episodes, and maybe this is the character arc, and then we can end this whole thing. Is I think in a recent episode, when there was a choice to do something mean, he didn't. He said, instead of sweep the leg, you said something, just do what you need to do. So my read,
totally up to date.
To Tori. That was the Tori.
Very impressive. You wrote totally up to date. I love it.
So my read on what was going on in John Kreese is, yes, his coping mechanism of win, no mercy was there, but what's happening is because of the hard knocks he's taken, a bit of his humanity is seeping into his character. And what he realizes is, I like to win, but I don't know that I want to hurt people in order to win. But I love winning. And so the potential, you could really hurt someone. It's almost like the hurt and fear in his character that is way underneath the anger bubbled up. And there was a part of him that backed off and said, no, I think you can win, win the right way. You don't have to do something mean. So I'm looking forward to your character having that part come up, because I think that what's going to happen is the trauma underneath what made him so angry, which is going to make him a beloved character, because people.
We shall see. We shall see.
Jesse always shuts me down on these spoilers here.
Boy.
I'm sorry if I gave away the season.
No.
Instincts are good. I mean, you're a doctor.
There is no good. There is no bad. There's just what?
There is no good. There is no bad. There's just
I forgot.
Strong.
Is that what it is? There is
it's just right or wrong. There is no good. There is no bad. It's just strength.
Well, listen, we just so appreciate coming on here, and there will be more, because I truly enjoyed chatting with you, and I cannot wait to hear more. Rachel will get in touch with you because I'd love to be on your podcast. Again, that was Dr. Mark Goulston, and check him out on social media, his website as well. And you're listening to Kicking It with the Koves. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, everyone.
We'll see you in the dojo, Doc.